Hello, in this chapter and in this section of Chapter 9, Photosynthesis for General Biology 1, we want to look at the nature of the chloroplast. We also want to look at the nature of the photosynthetic pigments and the overall process of photosynthesis. So, right here we want to take a look at this diagram that introduces these terms of thylakoid, thylakoid lumen, granum, and stroma. So you notice right up here we have a leaf. Then we're going to go in a little bit closer, and here's a cross section of a leaf. And the structure of this leaf, we have the epidermis here across the top. We use the same term for the outer layer of the leaf that we use for the outer layer of our cells, epidermis. And you notice that these cells in the epidermis are not colored in green the way they are inside the leaf. That's because we do not have chloroplasts in the epidermal cells. Now if we go down here to the bottom of the leaf in the epidermis, you notice that most of the epidermal cells aren't colored in as green. But then we've got a couple of exceptions right here and right here. Now, these exceptions that you see, those are called guard cells. And what they are guarding is this hole right here that's called a stoma, or plural would be stomata. And the stomata are open generally during the daytime, and what they will do is allow carbon dioxide to enter the leaf and oxygen from photosynthesis to exit the leaf. Now the other thing that happens is these tiny openings allow for an enormous amount of water, water in the form of water vapor to exit the leaf, going out into the atmosphere. Matter of fact, about 95% of the water that a plant takes up is lost by means of evaporation through these stomata. It takes, because of that loss of water, it takes about 500 pounds of water for a plant to make 1 pound of plant tissue. Now, it sounds very wasteful, but what it does, it provides this loss of water, provides evaporative cooling, which allows that leaf to sit out there in the hot sun and absorb sunlight. Now then, inside the leaf, we see that we've got these cells right here that are colored in green, and these cells up here colored green. These are called the palisade mesophyll, and palisade because they are, it looks like the upright columns that you would have on a palace. They're packed in there one right next to the other, and about 80% of the photosynthesis occurs right here in these palisade mesophyll. There's also some photosynthesis that occurs down here in what's called the spongy mesophyll, and it's called spongy because it's very loosely arranged, kind of like the structure of a sponge. Okay, also notice here's part of the vascular system, this vein. And we have these what are called vascular bundle cells right here, or bundle sheath cells. And again, notice that in this particular plant, the bundle sheath cells are not colored in as green. They do not have chloroplasts. Now, towards the end of the chapter, we'll see some variations on this, where there are certain types of plants where you do have chloroplast in the bundle sheath cells, but about 70% of plant species are like this right here. They do not have chloroplast in the bundle sheath cells. Okay, let's go in a little closer. So, inside one of those mesophyll cells now, we have these chloroplasts. And the chloroplasts are structured such that they have a double-layered outer membrane, or what your textbook refers to as an outer membrane and inner membrane. I kind of prefer the to refer to them as a double-layered outer membrane, because we're going to have these other membranes here further to the inside. And all these small flattened membranes are stacked up, and the individual membranes are called a thylakoid. The chamber inside the thylakoid is called the thylakoid lumen, and a whole stack of these thylakoid is called a granum, or plural grana. So right here you can see the artist version of what this would look like. Over here you see the electron micrograph, what it actually looks like. Now the thing to notice in this diagram is that it's not just this whole chloroplast that is green. Instead, the green part is the thylakoid membrane. And the reason for that is that the photosynthetic pigments, such as chlorophyll, are not just floating around free in the cytoplasm, in the stroma here in the chloroplast. Instead, the photosynthetic pigments, chlorophyll and other photosynthetic pigments, are locked into place, and they are embedded in these thylakoid membrane. So it's a very orderly, very controlled arrangement of these photosynthetic pigments. Okay, so if we consider the photosynthetic pigments, notice right here they are embedded in the thylakoid membrane. They are not just floating around freely in the fluid or the stroma inside the chloroplast. And these photosynthetic pigments, such as chlorophyll, are nonpolar. And so remember, the interior of the membrane is going to be nonpolar, fat or oil-like. This is what holds the photosynthetic pigments in place, is that they match up to this fat, oil-like nature of the interior of the membrane. If these photosynthetic pigments were polar and water-soluble, they would just disperse into the water inside the cell. So, being fat and oil-like holds these photosynthetic membranes in place and maintains an orderly arrangement. Now then, photosynthetic pigments. Well, everybody's familiar with chlorophyll as a green pigment that you have in plants, but we actually have two different chlorophylls. So there's chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A kind of has a bright green color to it. Chlorophyll B, a yellowish green color. Now another group of photosynthetic pigments, so this whole family of photosynthetic pigments here, called the carotenoids. And as you can guess, something called carotenoids are going to have a yellow-orange color to it, just like a carrot, which is rich in carotenoids. And you notice there's about 600 different carotenoids, and then those are subdivided into these two main groups of carotene and xanthophylls. Okay, the chlorophyll, of course, that's the green pigment, and it appears green because it reflects the green light. Now, if it's reflecting the green light, that means it is not absorbing the green light. The portion of the light spectrum that chlorophyll absorbs is going to be the blue light and the red light. So, if we look at this what's called absorbance spectrum, we notice that over here we've got the percent of the light that is absorbed in these different colors right here, different wavelengths. And we've got our two different chlorophylls, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are both green, and they tend to reflect the green light and the yellow light, but they have higher absorbance right here in the blue lights, in the blue portion of the light spectrum, and in the red portion of the light spectrum. There is less absorbance in the green and yellow portions of the spectrum. Now, what should be obvious is that the green light is not absorbed by the chlorophyll, because when we look at a tree, we look at a plant, we see it is green, it is reflecting the green light, thus it is not absorbing the green light. So we have what's called the action spectrum. What we just looked at back here was the absorbance spectrum. So just how much of the light in these different wavelengths is absorbed by chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Okay. Now the action spectrum, this is looking at the rate of photosynthesis at different wavelengths or different colors of light. What we see is that we get the maximum photosynthesis with the blue light and the red light, the same as where we had the maximum absorbance of the light energy. We get the least photosynthesis from green light and yellow light. Again, what should be obvious is we get the least photosynthesis from the green light, because when we look at the plants, they appear green. They are not absorbing the green light, but they are reflecting the green light. So here's the graph for the absorbance spectrum, and you notice we have a peak of, not absorbance, action spectrum. So we have a peak of photosynthesis right here in the blue light, and another peak in photosynthesis over here in the red light. We've got a dip right here, a valley, in the region of the green light. So very little photosynthesis right there in that area of green light. Again, plants are reflecting the green light, they're not absorbing it. So in the late 1800s, a really neat experiment was done to show this idea of the relationship between wavelengths of light and photosynthesis. And what they did was they took a piece of filamentous algae, laid that out on a microscope slide, and passed the light coming through the microscope through a prism, which broke the light up into its different wavelengths here that we see as these different colors. They then added an oxygen-requiring bacteria to this water surrounding the algae. The oxygen-requiring bacteria collected in the areas that had the greatest amount of photosynthesis, because those areas had the greatest amount of oxygen being given off by photosynthesis. So the distribution of the bacteria actually forms what looks like a graph showing the relative amounts of photosynthesis in the different colors or different wavelengths of light. So a really neat little experiment that was done there in the late 1800s. Okay, and in association with photosynthesis, we have multiple pigments. There are two types of chlorophyll plus these carotenoids. What this does, this allows the plant to use a greater portion of the light than it would be able to use if it only had one very pure type of pigment. And these carotenoids, the yellow-orange pigments that we have associated with photosynthesis, called accessory pigments, that they just increase the light absorbance. Okay.